I wasn't supposed to notice her that much. She was just my landlady, someone I handed rent checks to and exchanged quick nods with when we passed in the narrow stairwell. But when you live alone in a building that feels more like a converted boarding house than proper apartments, small encounters take on a heavier weight. That morning, I was sitting in the laundromat down the block, waiting for the spin cycle to end. My phone sat face down beside me, a half-written text to no one glowing faintly before the screen went dark. I typed out, "Hey, you around tonight?" but never added a name. Never sent it. The bell above the door jingled, and she walked in, Ms. Carver. Mid-40s, hair tied back like she hadn't meant to impress anyone, but somehow that made her stand out more. She carried a paper bag and set it on the counter where the vending machine buzzed. "You picked the quiet hour," she said, glancing at the empty room. "Yeah." Figured I'd avoid the crowd. I tried to sound casual, though it was hardly a crowd that ever gathered here, maybe 2 or 3 people at most. She smiled in that sideways way of hers, like she was half amused, half somewhere else. She didn't sit right away, just tapped her fingers against the edge of the bag. "Mind if I join you? My niece is staying with me this week." Needed a breather. I shrugged, though inside, it felt heavier than that. "Sure. It's not my laundromat." She laughed quietly and pulled out a thermos, unscrewing the lid with careful fingers. The smell of coffee drifted over. She poured some into the cap and held it toward me. "Want a sip?" "It's too strong, probably." I hesitated, then nodded. Her hand brushed mine as she passed it, not in any deliberate way, but it was enough to make me hyper-aware of the warmth. "It's good," I said, after tasting it. "Bitter but real. Not like the instant stuff I made in my apartment." She tilted her head, studying me for a second longer than comfortable. "You always walk around with that face, or is today special?" I blinked. "What face?" "That one." She mimicked my half-slouched posture, the way I tapped my foot. It was exaggerated, but not unkind. I laughed, though it came out short. "Guess it's just my default setting." For a while, neither of us said anything. The machines hummed, and the clock ticked too loudly above the door. She sipped her coffee, eyes fixed on the dryer window as if it might tell her something. I found myself watching her hands more than I should, the way her fingers curved around the cup, steady, certain. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, then flipped it face down without answering. The silence after was different, denser, almost. "Anyway," she said, standing as the dryer buzzed behind me, "I'll let you get back to it." I nodded, pulling my clothes into the basket, pretending to focus. She reached the door, then paused, turning back. Her voice was softer now, not meant for the whole room, just for me. "If you get bored up there, knock on my door sometime. My niece won't mind." And then she left. The bell above the door jingled again, leaving me with warm coffee still lingering in my chest and a thought I didn't know how to place. Why did it suddenly feel like she'd drawn a line, only to erase it in the same breath? The next time I saw her, it wasn't in the laundromat. It was in the hallway, outside our apartments. I was balancing a grocery bag on my hip, fumbling for my keys, when her door cracked open. "You always buy the same cereal," she said, leaning against the frame. Her niece, maybe 18, 19, was sprawled on the couch behind her, headphones on, oblivious. I held up the box. "Creature of habit, I guess." She stepped out, pulling the door mostly shut behind her. "I used to buy that brand for my daughter." She swore it tasted better straight out of the box than with milk. I almost asked about her daughter but stopped. The way her voice dipped told me it wasn't a casual memory. "Still does," I said instead, lifting the bag. She smiled faintly, but there was a weight in it. She noticed me shifting the bag, and before I could protest, she reached out. "Here, let me." Her fingers brushed mine again, steady, deliberate this time, as she took the weight from my arm and carried it inside my apartment. I hadn't invited her in, yet there she was, setting the bag on my counter like she'd done it 100 times. The space suddenly felt smaller, rearranged by her presence. "You keep it tidy," she said, scanning the shelves, the stacked dishes. Or empty, I admitted. Depends on how you look at it. She laughed softly. Empty can be easier. There was silence after that, but not the easy kind. My head filled with what I couldn't say, that I'd thought about her since the laundromat, that I'd replayed her offhand invitation more than I wanted to admit, that I wondered if she knew. She opened the box of cereal without asking and ate a handful, leaning against the counter. You ever get tired of eating alone? The question landed differently than it should have. It wasn't about food. Sometimes, I said carefully. Her gaze flicked to me then, steady, unblinking. And in that second, I imagined things I shouldn't have, her sitting across from me at breakfast, her hand brushing mine as she poured coffee, her voice low in the quiet of my kitchen. But the clock above the stove ticked too loudly, breaking it. I cleared my throat. Want some tea? She hesitated, then nodded. I filled the kettle, the mundane act suddenly charged, every movement too noticeable. She didn't speak, just watched as I set 2 mugs on the counter. When I handed her one, her fingers lingered against mine, barely a second, but enough. She smiled, almost to herself, and said, "Thanks." It could have meant nothing. But it didn't. Later, after she left, I stood alone in the kitchen, the steam from my untouched tea curling into the air. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The kettle whistled again a few nights later. Not mine this time, hers. I'd gone downstairs to grab my mail when I heard her door open. "You're up late," she said, holding her mug with both hands. Her niece wasn't around tonight. I noticed that immediately. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. She tilted her head, studying me, then stepped aside. "Tea helps. Want one?" I hesitated at her doorway. I shouldn't have gone in. But I did. Her apartment was warmer than mine, lamps instead of overhead lights, books stacked on every flat surface. Lived in. Personal. She poured the tea, slid a cup across the counter. My fingers almost grazed hers but didn't. "You don't talk much," she said after a while. Not accusing. Just noticing. I shrugged. "Not much to say." She smiled at that, faintly. "Or too much?" The silence stretched again. I watched the steam curl from my cup, pretending not to notice how close she was. Pretending not to notice how it felt different, being here. And then, 3 quick knocks at the door. We both froze. Her niece poked her head in. "Aunt Claire, do you have my charger?" Claire nodded toward the bedroom, masking something in her face so quickly I almost doubted I'd seen it. I set my cup down, suddenly aware of how this must look, me here, this late, the way the air felt charged. The girl disappeared down the hall. Claire exhaled quietly. "She doesn't care," she said, but softer than I expected. "Still," she didn't finish the thought. I stood unsure. Maybe I should. Her hand touched my arm, stopping me. Just enough pressure to keep me there. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. "I'm not," she started, then shook her head. "Forget it." I sat back down slowly. The air between us was louder than anything spoken. She busied herself with the kettle, though it had already cooled. Refilled it. Set it back. Her hands were steady, but her shoulders weren't. "I don't want to." She tried again, voice low. "Complicate things." I wanted to ask what things, but the words stuck. Instead, I watched her. The small tremor of her hand as she set the mug down. The way she avoided my eyes now, like she'd already said too much. The niece reappeared, mumbling a thanks as she slipped out with the charger. The door clicked shut again. And then it was just us. The room felt too small, too quiet. She leaned against the counter, looking at me like she wanted to say something else. My heart caught in my throat. I thought, no, I knew, she almost leaned in. Just the faintest tilt, the breath between us shifting. But she stopped herself. I don't remember leaving exactly, only the way her voice followed me at the door. A whisper. "Good night." It should have sounded ordinary. It didn't. It was late afternoon when I ran into her outside the building. She was sitting on the low stone wall near the sidewalk, coat pulled tight, watching people pass as if she wasn't really seeing them. I almost kept walking. But she looked up, caught my eye, and patted the spot beside her. "Long day?" I asked, sitting down. She gave a half smile. "They're all long lately." We sat like that for a while, cars moving in slow streams, the wind cutting sharper than it should have for spring. She pulled her scarf tighter. I wanted to offer my jacket, but didn't. "Not yet. You ever feel," she said suddenly, "like you missed the exit? That everything past 30 just narrowed?" The way she said it, flat, but not bitter, made something ache in me. "Maybe," I said carefully. "Or maybe it just feels that way when you're standing still." She turned to me then, searching my face like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or argue. Instead, she sighed. "You sound younger than you are." "I'm 23. I reminded her. "That's exactly my point." I almost said something reckless, like that's not the point at all, but her niece appeared across the street just then, laughing with someone her own age. Claire's eyes followed her, softening, then hardening in the same breath. "That's what it looks like when you're supposed to be free," she murmured. "And I couldn't help it," I asked. "So what do you see when you look at me?" The silence that followed was the heaviest yet. Her hands folded in her lap, fingers tightening just once before relaxing. "Something I shouldn't," she said finally, barely above the noise of passing cars. I felt the words hit deeper than I expected, like a truth she hadn't meant to let slip. I stared at her profile, the tension in her jaw, the way she didn't dare meet my eyes now. And in that second, a thought cut through me, sharp, jealous, almost childish. I didn't want her looking at anyone else like that. Not her niece's friends, not strangers, not anyone. I swallowed hard. "I think about you," I said before I could stop myself. "More than I should." Her breath caught, just the faintest sound, but I heard it. She finally turned, eyes meeting mine. No humor this time. No wall. Just raw, startled honesty. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "I know." The silence between us stretched thin, like glass. My heart thudded against it, waiting for it to crack. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "Do you really?" It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a real question. More like she needed to hear it out loud, needed to know how far gone I already was. And I didn't answer. Not with words. The moment hung there, closer than it had ever been, and I could feel how little it would take to break it. But I didn't move. Neither did she. The question lingered between us, hers, mine, both, and neither of us dared to finish it. The next week, everything changed. It wasn't dramatic, no slammed doors, no arguments, but the absence was louder than any fight could have been. Claire stopped lingering in the hallway. No tea invitations. No passing comments about groceries or laundry. Just a quick nod, a polite smile, and her door closing before I could say more than hello. At first, I told myself she was busy, that her niece was keeping her occupied. But the longer it went on, the more it felt deliberate. I caught myself listening for her kettle at night. Nothing. Walking slower past her door, as if she might open it at the exact moment I passed. She didn't. On the fourth day, I ran into her outside the building. She was carrying a box, old photo frames stacked inside, a couple of worn books on top. She looked startled when she saw me. "Spring cleaning," she said too quickly, shifting the box against her hip. I offered to carry it, but she shook her head. "I've got it." Her voice had that edge to it, the one people use when they want to sound firm, but really they're covering something fragile. I almost asked then. Almost said, "Why are you shutting me out?" But her niece came down the stairs behind her, laughing into her phone, and the words died in my throat. Later, in my apartment, I stared at my phone. Drafted a message. "Is everything okay?" Deleted it. Wrote another. "Did I do something wrong?" Deleted that too. I left the screen blank, fingers hovering, until it went dark. It wasn't until 2 nights later that I got a glimpse of the truth. I was heading upstairs when her door cracked open. Voices drifted out, hers and another man's. Older, deeper. I froze halfway up the stairs, listening without meaning to. "Just for the weekend," he said. "I don't know if that's a good idea," she replied, low, cautious. Her door shut before I could hear more. I didn't ask who he was. Didn't want to know. But the question burrowed in anyway. An ex? Someone she hadn't mentioned? The father of her daughter? That night I sat at my table with a mug of cold tea, trying to write something, anything. I typed "I miss talking to you," stared at it, then erased it. Tried again. "If you want me to leave you alone, just say it." Deleted that too. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. When I finally shut my laptop, the cursor still blinked in the empty message box. Waiting. I never pressed send. It was raining the night I finally knocked. Not hard, just a steady drizzle that made the hallway smell like damp brick and metal. I stood there longer than I should have, hand hovering, debating whether to walk away again. The door opened before I touched it. Claire stood there, hair loose, sweater sleeves pushed up. She looked surprised, then tired, then something else I couldn't name. "Hi," I said, because nothing better came out. She stepped aside. "Come in." Her apartment was dim, one lamp on in the corner. The niece was gone, back to school, I guessed. The place felt heavier without her, quieter. We sat at the table, 2 mugs between us, though either of us touched them. "I heard someone here last week," I said finally. My voice sounded smaller than I meant. "Didn't mean to listen. Just..." I couldn't stop wondering. She folded her hands, looked down at them. "My ex-husband. He was in town for a few days. He wanted to see our daughter." I nodded, though the knot in my chest tightened. She glanced up. It's not like that. Not anymore." The silence after was thick. I wanted to believe her. I did. But the real question pressed at me, the one I'd been swallowing for weeks. "Then what is this?" I asked. Her breath caught. She leaned back, hands curling against the edge of the table. "You're too young to be asking me that." "Maybe," I said. "But I'm still asking." Her eyes found mine then, sharp, almost pained. And for a long moment, neither of us looked away. "You make me forget myself," she said finally. The words sounded torn out of her. "And I can't decide if that's a gift or a mistake." I felt the weight of it, everything she hadn't said until now. The distance she tried to keep, the walls she kept patching even as they cracked. I leaned forward, not close enough to touch, but closer than I'd dared before. "I think about you all the time. Even when I don't want to." Her eyes softened, then flicked down, as if afraid of what she might give away by holding mine too long. She reached for her mug, then stopped halfway, hand hovering above the table. I almost took it. Almost. But I let the space remain, the air trembling between us. She exhaled slowly. "If we do this, nothing about it is simple." "I know." Her hand finally settled on the table. Not reaching, not retreating. Just there. I let my fingers move closer, not touching, just close enough for warmth to bridge the gap. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Small. Fragile. Real. "Okay," she whispered. Time moved differently after that night. Not in leaps, not in revelations, just in small shifts, almost unnoticeable if you weren't living them. Mornings, I'd hear her kettle whistle through the thin wall, right around 8:47. Sometimes she'd bring a thermos of black coffee down to the bench by the sidewalk, and I'd meet her there before class. We didn't call it a routine, but it became one. She never reached for my hand in public. I never asked her to. But sometimes, when the street was quiet and the world felt small, her shoulder would lean into mine for just a second longer than it had to. We talked more now, though not about everything. She told me about her daughter, how she was away at school, how she worried she hadn't been enough. I told her about my half-finished degree, the jobs I'd started and quit, how I felt like I was circling something I couldn't name. It wasn't confession so much as recognition. We didn't solve each other. We just saw. There were days when she pulled back. When she closed her door quickly, or when her voice was clipped, like she was reminding herself of the line we blurred. I'd go back to my apartment, sit with my tea, stare at the empty chair across from me. But then she'd knock, sometimes hours later, sometimes days, and slide a mug across my table with a quiet, "Sorry." And I'd say, "Me too," and we'd let it go. It wasn't perfect. But it was ours. I think about that afternoon on the wall sometimes, the way she asked if life had narrowed. Now, when I sit beside her on that same bench, watching cars drift by, I realize it widened instead, just not in the way either of us expected. The world didn't change. Rent was still due. Her ex still called sometimes. My phone still filled with unsent drafts. But sitting there, shoulder to shoulder, sharing silence that didn't feel empty anymore, it was enough. One morning, as we sat with our paper cups, she glanced at me and said, almost to herself, "I didn't think I'd get to feel this again." I didn't answer. I just looked at her, and she looked back, and that was the whole conversation. Now, when I think about it, it isn't the first moment I remember. Not the laundromat, not the tea, not even the almost confessions. It's the small ones that stay, the way she folds a napkin in half before setting it down, the way she hums off-key when she waters the plants by her window, the way she always leaves the second cup steaming, waiting, just in case. I guess that's what real closeness feels like. Not a finish line. Not fireworks. Just knowing the other person is there, and that's enough to keep the sentence going. And every time I see the clock hit 8:47, I think of her kettle, and the way she once whispered, "Okay, did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?"